He leaned against the stair railing like he owned the world and me. No need for lawyers, no messy divorce. Marcus said, his voice dripping with that same arrogant calm he'd always used to dismiss anything that didn't benefit him. Just leave the key on the counter, Olivia. He smiled, smirked really, as if this was some kind of game he'd already won. Behind him, the young woman who now called herself his fresh start, Hannah, was moving my furniture like she'd lived here forever. She giggled as she placed a plant I bought into a corner I designed like she belonged there. I wondered if she knew she was decorating the scene of a federal crime. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or throw anything like women in bad dramas do. I just zipped up my suitcase slowly, methodically, because when you know what's coming, you don't rush. And I knew exactly what was coming. "You're taking this well," Marcus said, squinting at me like he expected a breakdown. I smiled. He had no idea. He never once asked what I really did for a living. 15 years together and not a single genuine question about my government job. He thought it was paperwork and policy memos. He didn't know it came with surveillance vans, sealed indictments, and men trained to breach doors in under 3 seconds. And he definitely didn't know that the woman folding her sweaters in front of him had been building a case against him for 3 years. "You're right," I said, walking past him toward the front door. "We don't need any paperwork." That's when he should have known something was off. But Marcus always assumed he was the smartest person in the room, especially when the room had a woman in it. I loaded my suitcase into the trunk of my car. From the driver's seat, I looked back one last time at the man who had turned my marriage into a lie and the girl too naive or too greedy to see it. Then I pulled out my phone and sent a message I'd been waiting years to type. "Target cleared. Operation greenlit. 0900 execution confirmed." 3 minutes later, the response came. "Copy that. See you in the van. No papers, no lawyers, no shouting match. Just federal agents and a 178-page indictment." Marcus always said I wasn't ambitious enough. He should have looked closer. Because tomorrow morning at exactly 9 a.m., ambition would come knocking with a warrant and a bulletproof vest. At 5:12 a.m., I was already awake, fully dressed, coffee in hand, and watching the early feed from the surveillance team stationed 2 blocks away. The house still looked peaceful, like betrayal didn't sleep inside it. Funny how normal things look right before they collapse. Agent Torres slid into the van beside me, nodding toward the monitor. Target still on routine. I didn't look away from the screen. He always is. It was almost disappointing how predictable Marcus had become. After all those years of secrecy, of fake accounts, and offshore numbers, his morning routine remained exactly the same. He still made the same omelet, still used the same cologne I bought him on our anniversary, still believed he was 10 steps ahead of everyone else, especially me. He'd underestimated me for years, dismissed my ideas in front of dinner guests, silenced my concerns in boardroom tones at home, laughed when I suggested joint finances. "It's just easier this way," he said. "Cleaner." He didn't realize he was making it easier for me. By the time I'd discovered the first discrepancy in his books, an odd transfer to a shell company, registered to a now defunct address in the Cayman Islands, I was already growing suspicious. But suspicion wasn't enough. Not in my line of work. So I started building a timeline. Every transfer, every transaction, every business trip that lined up with major withdrawals. Every deposit to accounts under names he probably thought were clever, but were really just variations of his favorite poker hands. He thought he was playing cards. He didn't know I was counting every chip he put on the table. Torres handed me a protein bar and checked the clock. "Agents are posted. 1 at the house, 2 near his office. You sure you want to be here for this?" I nodded. I need to watch it fall. And not because I wanted revenge. That came and went. What I needed was resolution. The quiet kind. The kind that comes not from shouting matches or slammed doors, but from knowing that justice has been documented, notarized, and delivered with surgical precision. At exactly 7:45 a.m., the kitchen lights turned on. Right on schedule. Hannah's silhouette appeared first moving toward the coffee machine like she had any real idea how Marcus took his coffee. I almost pitied her. Almost, but Hannah knew what she was stepping into. Maybe not the scale, but enough. Women like her always do. By Ato's word, Marcus walked into frame shirtless towel around his neck, still humming some 90s rock song like he was the lead in his own fantasy. He kissed her forehead. She smiled, and for a brief second, they looked normal. That's the illusion. You don't catch criminals in ski masks and getaway cars anymore. You catch them making pancakes, shaving in the mirror, kissing someone who doesn't know they're sleeping beside a time bomb. Target on the move, one of the agents called through comms. Vehicle remote tracker active. He stepped outside wearing the navy suit I had dry cleaned last month. I watched him adjust his tie in the mirror just before unlocking the Mercedes he bought in his name, only for tax reasons, he claimed. Now I knew better. It was asset shielding. By 8:50, he was in the driver's seat, completely unaware that three separate units were already tailing him. A fourth had already set up at his office. At 8:57, Hannah wiped down the kitchen counter and sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, probably texting her best friend about the breakfast she just made, probably planning weekend shopping. She didn't know. She never saw it coming. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, we executed. Three black SUVs turned onto his street simultaneously. At the same time, two agents rang the doorbell. The house I had once filled with scented candles and quiet jazz now echoed with firm knocks and flashing warrants. From inside the van, I saw Hannah open the door on the monitor. She was wearing my old robe still too big for her. Federal Bureau of Investigation, ma'am. We have a warrant to search this property. Her mouth dropped open. What, there must be some mistake. No mistake, the lead agent said, stepping forward. Step aside, please. At the same moment, Marcus was just blocks away from his office when a squad car flipped its sirens behind him. His car slowed. He pulled to the side, adjusting his mirror, probably assuming it was for someone else. But then the agents surrounded the vehicle. Target intercepted, came the confirmation over comms. Compliant. Hands visible. Proceeding. My phone buzzed. A single message. What did you do? I didn't answer. Because this wasn't about words anymore. This was about accountability. This was about every time he made me feel small while laundering millions. This was about every time he reminded me that my government job wasn't as lucrative, not as sexy, not as powerful. He said he brought home the money. I brought the federal case. Back at the house, agents found exactly what I said they would. A hidden safe behind the bookshelf. Encrypted flash drives taped beneath the third drawer in his desk. Fake invoices, backdated ledgers, a phone with message logs that included more than just women's names, clients coded communications tracking systems for offshore routing. Torres looked at me. How long did you know? I sipped my coffee, calm. 3 years. I wanted to be sure. I wanted the full map. He raised an eyebrow. And the mistress. I gave a half smile. She was new, not the first, but the last straw. By the time Marcus was booked into custody, the agents had already begun freezing the accounts. The house seized. The cars seized. Every asset registered under his name was now under investigation for laundering and wire fraud. There were no joint accounts, no shared titles, no legal complications. Because when he smirked and said, "No need for divorce papers," he gave me exactly what I needed, a clean path for full asset recovery. Back at the house, Hannah sat on the edge of the sofa, trembling. An agent handed her a blanket and a cup of water. She asked again, why, what is happening? She still didn't know. Or maybe she did and just couldn't believe it. Later that day, her name appeared in the witness pool. Voluntary cooperation. She didn't want charges. She offered everything she had. Emails, overheard conversations, financial records she didn't even realize she had access to. And she told them one thing I hadn't known: Marcus had planned to leave the country within the month. That detail alone changed everything. It upped the charges, added flight risk, turned the case from strategic to urgent. And that's when the department gave me full clearance to go public within the unit. Agent Parker. That's what they called me now, not Olivia, not the wife, just Parker. Federal analyst turned lead operative on one of the biggest financial crimes busts of the quarter. The headline ran by evening: investment banker arrested in multi-million dollar fraud case. Wife led federal operation. I didn't read the comments. I didn't need the applause. But I allowed myself one moment, just one, sitting alone in the quiet break room of the bureau with a cold soda in hand and the hum of vending machines around me. I let it hit me. It was over. Not just the operation, the pretending, the biting my tongue, the performing normalcy in a house built on a fault line. It was all over. 6 months later, rain drizzled lightly on the marble steps of the federal courthouse. I sat quietly in the courtroom, my blazer buttoned to the collar, watching the door where Marcus would enter. No more Mercedes. No more tailored Italian suits. No smug smile. Just the cold clank of shackles and a jumpsuit too baggy for the man who once thought he owned the world. He looked around like someone still trying to convince himself this wasn't real. Then his eyes found me, and for once he didn't look superior. He looked lost. All rise, the court clerk announced. The judge entered, and the courtroom fell into solemn silence. Then the charges were red wire fraud securities, fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice. Each one landed like a nail on the coffin of a man who thought he was untouchable. I didn't need to hear it all. I'd written half the report. I'd cataloged the evidence, organized the files, built the timeline. Every dollar stolen, every shell company, every email he thought no one would ever see. Hannah wasn't present in court, but her testimony, over 12 pages long, was enough to put the final locks on Marcus's cell. She had turned state's witness so fast it would have been funny if it wasn't so predictable. She gave the prosecutors everything: overheard meetings, whispered conversations, even a few of his burner phone numbers. Turns out she was far more observant than she looked. But Marcus didn't flinch. Maybe because deep down he knew this had been coming the moment he smirked at me at the top of the stairs and said, "No need for lawyers." He just didn't know how hard the fall would be. 15 years in federal prison, the judge declared. No early release, full asset forfeiture, restitution to begin immediately. It was clean, surgical, devastating. I stepped out of the courtroom slowly, no need to look back. I didn't need to see his face again. I'd already buried that version of him. Agent Torres was waiting in the lobby with 2 coffees. "Extra strong, no sugar," she said, handing me one. "Thanks," I replied. "So, that's that." She shook her head. "That's the beginning. You're not done." The house had been seized, the cars auctioned. Victims were already receiving repayment. I didn't keep a dime, not for legal optics, not for pride, just because I didn't want anything from him. This was never about revenge. It was about truth, about reclaiming the version of myself I'd silenced for too long. A few weeks later, I got a message from the Federal Corrections Office. Marcus wanted to meet. I almost ignored it. What could he possibly say that would matter now? But Torres raised an eyebrow and said, "Sometimes hearing them say it out loud helps you close the door." So I went. The visitation room was sterile, dimly lit. Metal table, 2 plastic chairs, and no privacy. He looked smaller, thinner, paler. His jumpsuit was wrinkled and his eyes tired. "Thanks for coming." He started, his voice almost too soft to be his. I just, I need to know why." I didn't blink. "You mean why I didn't stop you? Why I didn't warn you? Why I let the FBI in?" He nodded. I leaned forward. "I did warn you. I asked about the untraceable accounts. I suggested bringing in outside auditors. I told you your investment strategies were dangerously opaque. You dismissed me." He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. "I didn't think you understood," he murmured. "I didn't think that I was capable," I said, pulling out my FBI badge and placing it gently on the table between us. "You never even asked what I actually did. 15 years, and you never once cared to find out." His shoulders slumped. "When did you know?" he whispered. 3 years ago," I said. "Right after that big win you toasted with imported scotch and lies." That's when I started building the case. I could have arrested you then, but I didn't want just you. I wanted all of it. He was quiet. And Hannah, he asked. She just made it easier, I said, rising from my seat. She reminded me it was time to stop protecting a man who never once protected me. A guard stepped forward, signaling the meeting was over. Marcus looked up, voice quieter than ever. I'm sorry, Olivia, not just for her, for everything. I paused at the door, turned back one last time. I know, I said, but sorry doesn't always fix what you've broken. Outside spring was returning. The streets were wet with promise, and the air smelled of clean starts. Back at the bureau, a fresh stack of case files waited on my desk. Financial fraud, real estate scams, Ponzi schemes. Crime never sleeps, but neither do those who stop it. Torres tossed a thick folder onto my desk. This one's yours. Arizona fraud ring. Could be a big one. I cracked my knuckles, picked up the first document. Let's find out. Later that night, we gathered at a quiet corner bar. No fanfare, no speeches, just laughter, warm light, and the soft hum of vindication. Would you do it all again? Someone asked me. I sipped my drink, looked around at the people who now called me a leader, not someone's wife. Yes, I said, because it happened exactly how it needed to. And now, I finally feel like myself again. The next morning, sunlight cut clean across my desk as I walked into the office early. There were no headlines, no more emergency calls, no late night surveillance meetings. Just peace and a new case file waiting quietly. I smiled. Funny how justice moves in silence once the storm has passed. A new intern greeted me nervously at the hallway. Agent Parker, they told me you'd be, leading the forensic briefing. Yes, I said, taking the file from his hands. You'll want to grab coffee. This one's dense. He nodded, practically sprinting. I paused, glancing at my badge. For years it had been tucked inside drawers, presented only when required. Now it felt like armor. Not to hide behind, but to stand tall in. Sometimes we carry a version of ourselves so long that we forget we were meant for more. We shrink to fit someone else's life, someone else's definition of love, of success, of strength, until a crack appears and the light forces its way in. Marcus had cracked everything, the marriage, the illusion, the life I'd once believed was mine. But from that break, something better had taken root. Later that day, I met my sister for lunch. We sat by the window of a quiet little bistro, the kind of place Marcus would have rolled his eyes at. Too simple, too human. You look lighter, she said, eyeing me over her wine glass. I feel it, I admitted. It's strange. I thought the end would feel heavier. But it's a beginning, she said, not an end. She wasn't wrong. Since Marcus's arrest, my life had begun filling with the kinds of people and moments I used to forget to notice. A hiking trip with old college friends. A spontaneous weekend in the mountains. Movie nights with Torres and the team. Texts that weren't about surveillance updates or coded signals, but brunch birthdays books. I wasn't just rebuilding, I was expanding. Even Hannah, in her own way, had started again. I heard she'd moved back in with her parents and enrolled in community college. Her social media accounts had gone dark. Maybe she'd learned that shortcuts always come with a cost. Maybe not, but either way, it was no longer my burden. One evening, as I left the office late, I passed the old evidence room where we'd stored Marcus's files. It was empty now. The shelves cleared, boxes sealed and archived. I paused, pressing my hand against the cold metal of the filing cabinet. Then I walked away. No lingering. No more holding on to what I'd already outgrown. A few weeks later, I was asked to speak at a seminar for financial crime prevention. I stood on stage looking out at a room full of analysts, agents, and bright-eyed interns. They didn't know my story, not all of it. Just the headlines, just the myth. But I told them the truth. Sometimes you'll be underestimated, I began. You'll be the quiet one in the room, the assistant, the background, the one they forget to ask. I let that sink in before I continued. And that will be your advantage. Because while they talk over you, you'll be watching. While they dismiss you, you'll be learning. And one day when it matters most, you'll be ready. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was steady, earnest, real. After the seminar, one of the younger agents approached me holding out a worn notepad. You said you started building your case 3 years before the arrest, she said. How did you keep going, knowing what he was doing, living beside him? I thought for a moment before answering. Because I loved myself more than I loved the illusion, and I knew that real justice takes time. That weekend, I went hiking solo. Just me, the trees, the wind, and a quiet sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. At the summit, I sat on a rock and looked out over the valley. My phone buzzed, but I didn't check it right away. Eventually, I did. A message from an unknown number. You were always smarter than me. I see that now. I hope someday you'll forgive me. I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. Some messages are meant to fade. Some people are meant to stay behind. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about hurting them back. It's about rising so far they can no longer reach you. It's about building something stronger, quieter, unshakable. Justice wasn't just what we served to Marcus. It was what I gave myself when I chose not to let betrayal define me. The next Monday, I walked back into the office. Same badge, same purpose, but a different woman. Agent Parker, wife no more. And as I opened a new file on a fresh case, I smiled, knowing that sometimes the greatest stories don't end with a bang. They begin with a smirk and end with an agent knocking on the door.